developing situation with Russia on the border of Ukraine. In the last hour, Congressman Mike Turner releasing a statement saying the number of additional Russian troops along Ukraine, the border of Ukraine, is now as high as 80,000. That's different. First we heard 20, 30,000. Now we're at 80,000. Concerns that President Vladimir Putin may try to take 3 Ukraine towns that stand in the way of Russia having a clear land path to the Crimean Peninsula. You're seeing some of that on your screen there. KT McFarland is a Fox News national security analyst, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for President Ronald Reagan. So those new numbers sound big. I mean, those are big, and those are the only numbers that we have right now, KT. Yeah. I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, it gives him options. It gives him options. Putin could go in tomorrow. Who's going to stop him? You know, NATO's not involved in this. Ukraine is not a NATO partner. The sanctions that we've put on, the United States has put on, have been pretty insignificant, very little price to pay, and I think Putin probably has calculated this is his moment.
What do you think it means that he's doing this right now while the president, our president, is in Europe?
Well, I think it's calling his bluff, and it's right in his face. Putin understands that his leverage, his position is never going to be stronger than it is now. Why? Well, the European economy is sputtering. It's not going to take economic sanctions that are going to punish their own economy. 2, the Europeans have really not disarmed, but they've cut back on their military so much, they're not a military threat anymore. The United States is war-weary. The American public doesn't want to do another war. And so Putin understands that maybe any military option, any military threat we might have probably doesn't exist anymore.
So does that mean we do nothing?
No, I think just the opposite. You don't negotiate. I mean, the president, when he talks about we're going to negotiate, diplomacy, look, if you're negotiating without leverage, you're not negotiating. You're begging. You're hoping for the best. That's not what we should be doing. We could do a couple of things. We could reinforce our position in NATO. We could say we're going to rebuild. We're reconsidering that missile shield in Poland and the Czech Republic, which we have every right to do. Those are NATO allies. The other thing we could do is go to Putin and say, you know, here's the long game. You played the long game for 15 years. You built up your economy, you've restructured your government, you've rebuilt your military, and now you think you're going to reclaim the great Russian Empire. Not so fast. Because within 5 years, if we pledge to the Europeans to say, within 5 years, we're going to help you become energy independent of Russia, we're going to help you develop your own natural resources in Poland and in Ukraine, we're going to develop ours, we're going to build the Keystone pipeline, we're going to help the countries to Russia's south build pipelines to go through.
Right, but KT, with so much being said about Vladimir Putin right now, and how some are describing him as a madman, right? Others are saying, no, he's just highly intelligent and he has his own goals in mind. This is his own dream. And he's driven from something within that maybe we perhaps are underestimating.
Completely.
Why would any of that work? If he's a man so driven, why would any of that
Here's why. I mean, you know, you've got to have, you can't just roll over and say there's no price for any of this. Just because we're not going to go to war, there should be a price to be paid, and he can pay it economically. That's how we won the Cold War the first time, and that's how we could win it the second time. Make him pay to the point where his economy could crumble within a few years. The other thing to do, though, is where does this lead? I'm worried that it's going to NATO. There are 3 countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. They're the Baltic states. They are members of NATO. Now, NATO has an Article 5 that basically I call it the 3 Musketeers article. It's all for one, one for all. If any country has an armed attack against that country, all the other NATO countries come to its military defense.
Now, let me ask you about the armed attack, because what we've seen thus far in Ukraine is these unmarked troops. We know they're Russian. They're Russian special operators going into these special forces going into these areas. But shots haven't been fired. And essentially they've gone in and just taken what they've wanted so far. A few shots here and there, but no one's been killed. I mean, there's different reports, but we're not seeing
this is not an armed
engagement. Right. So with what NATO's saying, does it have to be an all-out battle for us to get involved? Or if someone just walked in and said, well, you know, I think the Lithuanians here would like us to be here, so we're going to be here, and no one's stopping us.
Jenna, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's that word armed. What happens if there is no tanks across the border? They're not sending the aircraft over. What happens if Russia just poises tens of thousands of troops, political intimidation? We're going to raise the price of your natural gas. We're going to do all these different things. And by the way, those Americans aren't going to come and help you, and neither are the rest of the Europeans. Political intimidation, economic blackmail may get Putin what he wants. And then there'll be a bunch of lawyers all debating whether that constitutes an armed attack. And as you've just pointed out, there were not guys with Russian insignias in Crimea. There may not be guys with Russian insignias in Ukraine, eastern Ukraine, but you better believe they're Russian.
We might be the only ones splitting hairs on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Great to see you as always. John?